Hello, everybody. It's such a pleasure to be back in Barcelona. I come here as often as I can. In fact, maybe I should come and live here. Do you think I should come and live here, Luis? Probably. Not just because of the weather. When we talked about what I would speak about tonight, it seemed to me that there are a few subjects which are very close to my heart. Art Nouveau, obviously. But also, I'm very interested in ceramic and the history of ceramic and how ceramic functions as a medium within culture. So we thought it would be interesting to talk about Art Nouveau and ceramics. So the lecture tonight will be looking at ceramic and then looking at Art Nouveau and trying to bring the two together to say something about them. It's also that in the last year or so, I've been working on a book on Art Nouveau architecture to try and develop new theoretical approaches to Art Nouveau, what Art Nouveau means and what it means in different cities around Europe. The coup de fouet and the colleagues in Barcelona have been hugely important for showing us that Art Nouveau was everywhere. A few decades ago, we used to think it was in Belgium and France, and there were strange things in Barcelona. Coup de fouet now tells us there are at least 86 cities with important Art Nouveau, and probably far more than that. So I thought it interesting to look again at Art Nouveau architecture and to try and explain why it happened then and how it differs from city to city, because what is so interesting about Art Nouveau is that it's very clear that there are common factors. There are common things everywhere in Europe, but everywhere you go, it's so different as well. It's the same and it's different, which I think is hugely important and interesting. So anyway, I will say something about ceramic and my view of ceramic, and then Art Nouveau, and then we will look at some beautiful images. I've been lucky to travel around Europe to places like Ljubljana, Budapest, and many other places, Helsinki, Riga, and so forth. And I'll show you some of these images tonight. My first slide, oh, hang on. Yes, I can see it. Oh, yes. Sorry. Yeah. I wanted to complicate the history of art a little bit. So if you think of any cultural object, think of a pot or a painting or a piece of sculpture or a building, and think of the things which contribute to why it looks like that. What makes a cultural object look like it does? And we realize there are many things which make every single object that we have in our cultures. There are many things acting on those objects to make them look. So demography, the geography, national identity, international politics, contemporary aesthetics, contemporary philosophy, production technology, raw materials, incredibly important in ceramic. Only a fool would carry clay a very long way to put it into production. You always find ceramic where there's good clay in the ground. Training systems, the art schools and universities, patronage, those people like Well and others who support the arts, the marketplace, urban development. And I have to say, I was thinking maybe I should change this list and put Donald Trump in there, because I think he's going to change everything going forward. Hang on. Ceramic is not a branch of a broader history, I don't think. It interfaces, it collaborates with the other medium, but it is an art to itself as well. And it has some qualities which I think make it very, very interesting. Ubiquity. By ubiquity, we mean it's everywhere. It goes from you can pay €1 for a mug, or you can pay a fortune for a mug, depending where it's from. It goes back in time, and I'll be showing you in a minute. It goes back a very long way, and everybody has it. Everybody has ceramic objects in their homes. sometimes, and quite often, ordinary people have quite valuable ceramic in their home. So ubiquity. Ceramic is very different, say, from painting in that ceramic is everywhere. Painting is exclusive. It's a small art. Ceramic is a big art in that it's everywhere. And Christopher Dresser, who's perhaps the most important English designer of the 19th century, said this rather nice thing. He said ceramic was his favorite thing because it's so inexpensive as to be almost valueless, which you could see might be an insult, like it's worth nothing. But what he was saying was, it's mud. It begins as earth. So it's not gold, it's not diamonds, it has no value. So the poetry and the beauty of ceramic, 100% is in how the artist makes it, the craftsperson, the designer. That makes ceramic perhaps the most interesting art because it starts with no value and then becomes valuable. And I was interesting, you see 2 slides here. That's a Ming Dynasty Chinese vase. And this is one of my favorite bars in Paris. And huge numbers of hotels, bars, and pubs around Europe were decorated in tile. It was an inexpensive and cheap and clean way to decorate. In other words, it's everywhere. The Ming vase, I noticed it was about 5 years ago that a Chinese patron paid 245 million euros for one pot. So it goes from the most expensive to the cheapest and everywhere. I think that makes it interesting. Right, Art Nouveau. The Art Nouveau style is premised on a complex use of the past fused with modern life. Past and present come together in Art Nouveau. As a modern art, I think Art Nouveau is most interesting for me in that it makes a brilliant use of the past whilst trying to create a modern design. So the past and the present come together in Art Nouveau, and you can see that everywhere in this city. When you look at Gaudi, no matter how wonderfully, extraordinary, crazy the buildings can be, you can always see different aspects of history in there that Gaudi has made use of. And obviously, that's the case with Puig and with the other modernistas. So Art Nouveau is a modern style which makes use of the past. And as I'm sure many of you realize, it also makes a very powerful use of nature. And there are 2 quotes here. Art Nouveau has reverted to nature that it might discover new beauty. Instead of copying antique ornament, the artists have once more looked about them and have copied the beauty of flowers, grasses, and foliage from our gardens and our forests. During the 19th century, it was not thus. And Eliel Saarinen, the great, great architect, Art Nouveau architect, working mainly in Helsinki before he went to live in America. We have said that art cannot come into being unless it is instinctively felt. Furthermore, we have said that this is a state of things which prevails in man. Instinctive creation is a fundamental phenomenon. What Saarinen was trying to say to us was that art gets produced much in the way that nature gets produced. It comes from within. It's connected to instinct, and it grows within people. It was the great, great period, I would say, for nature coming to the fore. There were good reasons for that, of course. And I think that Britain can take pride in being the first nation that created ecological disaster and began the great process of undermining nature and causing climate change. I think the British can take credit for being the first with the Industrial Revolution and then going forward. But alongside that, many people in Britain and Northern Europe realized that if we ignore nature, it will destroy us in the end. And perhaps that's a signal for our times. Right, so ceramic, I would say to you, has 3 broad types. I've called them idioms, but 3 broad types that really cover what ceramic does as an independent medium. Pots or vessels, figures and figurines, and tiles. The pot, the vessel, all forms of vessel, the figure, the human presence in art, and tile, that is all aspects of architecture. Ceramic artists have worked in these three areas going back into the ancient periods, and this is very much the three idioms which are at work in the Art Nouveau period. Pots. Pots can be very old, and I would say that the ancientness of ceramic, it's the only art. We have the cave paintings, of course, in Altamira, and we have paintings in Lascaux, but actually the pigments which those paintings are made of, we would consider to be clay slips. In other words, those ancient peoples were working mainly with liquid clay, I would say. But we've now discovered vessels which go back to the same period. We have pots which go back to before 30,000 BC. This particular pot is around 8,000 BC. I would say to you that if you are a ceramic artist or a ceramic designer, that ancient history is always in your mind. It's always an element that when you make a pot and fire it, it's going to be around for thousands of years. Even if you break it, it will still be there. I think that changes the way that ceramic artists think. It makes it different from most of the other media. An ancient Greek pot. That's about 480 BC. I love this wonderful image of a potter from the German Renaissance period, which exposes the fact that it was widely considered to be a woman's art in that period. And what I especially like with her is she's beautiful dyed blonde hair and red lipstick while she makes her pots. And I think is rather charming. But men and women were both centrally involved in the ceramic process. And I put this up just to, we will come back to it later, but one of the great revolutions in ceramic was the arrival of the Islamic armies in Europe, who brought a ceramic technology with them, which first of all impacted Spain. And these are both this is Maniz and Malaga wares. So a combination of medieval Spanish pottery with Islamic pottery gave us these extraordinary vessels, which I think are amongst the most important which were ever made. They impacted the whole of Europe, and especially Northern Europe, where they became enormously valued. And being British, I have to show you this. These are tea and coffee cups from the 17th century. And if you went to a cafe in the 17th century in London, you would be drinking out of one of these. And what I find really charming is that the wider one there, they were called cappuccines. So in 17th century London, you could get a cappuccino, you know. It probably wouldn't be any good, but you could get one. And the rest are also tea bowls. Ubiquity. So Art Nouveau pots. I'm going to show you Belgium, France, and America, in fact, with vessels. This is an extraordinarily beautiful vessel by Henri van der Velde, a Belgian artist, who was very interested in putting his handmade ceramic into production. I would say the single most concentrated, we could debate it, but the single most concentrated Art Nouveau vessel production, I would say, was French. And it was tied up with what became known as the stoneware revival. That is to say, stoneware, a method of making ceramic, which was largely taken in from China, and the combination of that with a range of Chinese glazes. And from the 1880s through to the First World War, there were a powerful number of French ceramic artists who were producing wonderful vessels. You can say this is Auguste Delage, this is Ernst Shapley, who was a very major figure. And this would be rather typical, the Delage rather typical, very loose, open, natural approach to decoration. It's almost like rainfall or a river flowing, which was their idea. This is Jean-Joseph Carriès, and Jean Carré also did figurative work, but he made these incredible vessels where the glaze appears to be flowing, like snowfall or rain or a river. George Earnshaw. I have to say, I find 1900, for someone to be making vessels like this, one does wonder what kinds of drugs he was taking at the time. I'm sure it was a very popular activity in France. But George Earnshaw did this experimental ceramic ware, which again is to do with a combination of natural form, nature, geology, but I would say also very typical in the Art Nouveau period, an attempt to express emotion, to use these things to provoke an emotion in the viewer. And that's quite extraordinary, I'm sure you agree. Paul Généret. And it's to do with symbolism, it's to do with human psychology, which is very much the Art Nouveau period, but human beings fused with nature, metamorphosis, the process where the natural world, the animal world, and the human world come together. And again, that's a major theme in Art Nouveau, as you know, where human beings are melted into nature. We also shouldn't forget that this was the post-Charles Darwin age, where we widely considered that we weren't separate from nature. We no longer thought that God made a garden and put human beings into it, and that human beings were separate from nature. Human beings, by the end of the 19th century, was widely understood that we are part of nature. Nature and humanity are the same thing. And pots like this express that. Oh yes, and oh, hang on. Could you make that video? I have some clever little videos. I thought it might be useful for you to see some of these things close up. So, another major theme for me which comes out, skill. It was an age in which there was a focus on skillful creation of things, and I'm sure you agree that's an extraordinary vessel by Edmond Lacanal, who went on to be a major Art Deco artist as well. Moving to America, maybe my single favorite potter of the entire age is this man, George Orr. And that's a picture of George Orr. I think it's fair to say that he was more or less completely insane, as you can see from there. I don't know what that is. I hope it's not his passport photograph, because he would never be allowed to travel anywhere. George Orr was an unbelievably skillful artist, and for many years we thought that he was very isolated. He lived in a little town called Biloxi in Mississippi, so, you know, very isolated. But we now know that, in fact, he went around all the great American World's Fairs, that he read magazines, that he was aware of what was happening in France and Spain and England and so forth. And he made these, when he died, he had a huge barn absolutely full of these extraordinary vessels. And essentially what George Orr is doing is fusing the human body with natural form. It can be very erotic, it can be very sexual. It's up to you whether you see this one as being very sexual. I do, but perhaps I have problems. I don't know. I think it's quite sexual. The one in the middle there, likewise, a combination of human activity and natural activity. Anyway, all of these vessels, they now have become the most expensive ceramics in the last 150 years or so. And sadly, most of them are in America. It would be wonderful to bring an exhibition of this man's work over here. He started to show in the major expositions, in America. He had a stand in Chicago, and he had a stand in various other ones. And he had a big sign that said, "The greatest potter in the world." That's how he promoted himself, which I think is wonderful. Artist van Briggle. I don't think, if I said this is quite sexual, I think you'll all agree at this time round. You don't need, but artist Van Briggle tragically died very young. And his main work was to create a vessel which, again, he fused with the human form. And often it would be a female figure twined into a vessel shape. Many of the American potters just used direct natural form to create the vessels. The Groovy pottery, operating from the 1880s, it still exists, in fact, but this was their golden age. I apologize for that slide. Those are in the Metropolitan Museum in New York, and you can tell that I took that picture. There are many women at work in Art Nouveau ceramics, especially in the Netherlands, in Scandinavia, but especially in America. And Adelaide Robineau was one of the most important ones. So it was an interesting breakthrough that women formed groups and associations to focus on ceramic art. And it was a way that women could break through into the art world properly, because in 1900, as I'm sure you're all aware, it was extremely difficult for a woman to break through in the fine arts, almost impossible in architecture, but in certain arts, textile art, ceramic, women could make major breakthroughs. And American ceramic is dominated by a range of fantastic women makers. Many of them working for the Tico pottery. And again, I'm sure you agree, these extraordinary vessels. And Frank Lloyd Wright, the architect, was one of the designers for Tico, the Avon Faience company. So, a range of pots. Until recently, we thought that this was the oldest piece of fired ceramic that had ever been found. We think it's 29,000 BC, but probably older. The Dolny Vestioni Venus, we don't know much about it. It's about this big. It was found in the Czech Republic. And there are a number of them, and we don't really know what their functions were. Since then, weirdly and amazingly, we have found pottery shards, broken pottery in the Scandinavian countries, which we think are 35,000 years old. And in Japan, the Jomon culture, we think again, fired ceramic going back to about 30 to 35,000 years. What's especially interesting for me in there is that the Vikings were very nomadic. They spent a lot of time visiting Britain to take everything which the British had over a very long period of time. And the Jomon peoples were also nomadic, but they made big pots. And it has caused a great deal of confusion amongst archaeologists. But I think probably the solution is that the Jomon people moved from place to place through a season, following the animals, the migration of animals. And when they moved, they would bury their pots and then dig them up when they came back the year after. So they didn't carry the pots around with them, they left them in places. And because of that, when they forgot to go back, or if they didn't go back, we have found a lot of Jomon pots. But going through history, I suppose what this shows us, interestingly, that the very oldest ceramic we've got are not pots. The very oldest ceramic we've got are figures. That's interesting. And the figure, of course, as you know, goes right through history. This is Vincennes, Parisian, early 18th century, showing a scene of people doing naughty things. And I especially like this particular pot because this man is trying to be involved with this lady. And the dog is a symbol of veracity. When you see a dog near a lady, it means that she's virtuous and she's above suspicion. But the dog is kind of shrugging and saying, "Oh my God, you know, what's she doing?" So very French, and very much part of the figurine tradition. And then we move to into the Art Nouveau period with the figure. These figures were, again, French and made in Sèvres, and they're very much thought to be figures which are based on the dancer Loie Fuller. That little image at the top there is the Loie Fuller Theatre, which was in the Paris 1900 World's Fair. So that was Loie Fuller's building, very Art Nouveau, by Henri Sauvage. And these figures were made at the time, and there are quite a lot of sets of them. But the Art Nouveau artist pushed the figure into new terrain, I think. Into, again, quite a psychological terrain. That's Jules Gustave and Jules Charry. And quite often, we get into quite bothersome, psychologically complicated areas within the Art Nouveau period. This is another Jean Carré. This is 1889, just at the very beginning of the Art Nouveau age proper. And if you look at it, it's a child. So this is about half a meter high. It's about this big. But you can see that this child is not happy. In fact, the child looks very, very tough and cruel. And the child appears to be ripping a doll apart. And it's been widely understood, perhaps, that the doll represents her parents. Architectural ceramic. Kavrovo Street in Prague has a number of these large-scale ceramics made into figures. And Italian Art Nouveau has taken the typical Art Nouveau language. The female with flowing hair, as you know, is a major theme throughout the whole of Art Nouveau. I think this particular one, made into a vessel, is particularly powerful. Right, so that's just the first bit, because I think the most important thing for this evening is the idea of tile. And when I say tile, I don't just mean square tiles. I'm really suggesting the use of ceramic in architecture more broadly. Ceramic applied to architecture. Perhaps the single greatest age of mainstream tile in architecture comes with Islam and the fantastic development of colored architecture, polychrome architecture, through the use of tile in the Islamic age. And again, this use of tile in architecture was transmitted to Europe, and one of the first places it hit, southern Italy and Spain. And this interior is a 16th century space in Aveiro, in Portugal, where I would say the majority of their significant Art Nouveau buildings are in Aveiro. But while I was there, I was taken around this extraordinary monastery, this complex, where the use of tile to create a complete interior was quite common. I found it very interesting a few years ago when I decorated, this is an aside, when I decorated my bathroom at home, I thought, I'm going to get tile, and I went down to the local big store where they sell these things, and all the tiles were either from Spain or Portugal, none of them from Britain. And I thought, that's so interesting, because that's a tradition that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years of architectural ceramic production, was powerful in Spain and Portugal and transmitted all over Europe, really from the Renaissance onwards, but really coming back to the original arrival of Islam. And I'm sure you agree, that's quite extraordinary. It's far nicer than my bathroom, I quickly add. And I think you know where this is. I was saying to Louise that it was raining every single day in London, and I thought, oh good, I'm going to Barcelona. And it rained every single day. And I thought, I must be cursed. It must be because I came, you know. Yeah, as we look at Casaballo and Casa Amalta, we realize the importance of ceramic. But frequently, and this is where we can develop another concept, the use also of mosaic, of sgraffito, especially in the Puig building, this extraordinary sgraffito surfacing, which seems to me to be especially important in Catalonia. It's everywhere. And there's a young man who completed a PhD recently, I think, on this material, incredibly interesting, in Barcelona. And clearly, this is an exercise in ceramic and mosaic. It raises another concept, which I think is very, very important for Art Nouveau, and that's the idea of Gesamtkunstwerk, a German word which means total work of art. And I would say that Gaudi and the other Modernista architects were the greatest at pulling together all the arts to orchestrate them into a single way of working, to organize themselves so that ceramic, metal, wood, mosaic, stone carving and so forth integrate in. And in the greatest of the buildings in Barcelona, it's just incredible to see how all of those different skilled trades have been enabled to work closely together to create a single expression. It's something which heavily disappeared in the 20th century, I would say, that ability of all the skilled trades to come together. And I think it's been at its most glorious in this city. It also exists, of course, we found it, Brussels likewise had wonderful skilled trades which were integrated into single interiors. But I think Barcelona is the greatest. This is inside the Casa Amalta, and it occurs to me that a combination of ceramic and mosaic, but clearly there's an interesting coming together of medieval ideas, of medieval ceramic and Renaissance ceramic with the Islamic idea of ceramic. And this incredible building, I often wonder what it would be like to live there. I think you would go crazy very quickly living inside this house, because it's extraordinary. As you all know, you see it all the time. But a building like that has never, ever, ever been built in Britain. I mean, it would never be built in Britain. There is something about the spirit of the festival, the fiesta, and the idea of public life, which is very powerful in this region, I think, which leads to buildings like this. That as you go past it, it's about the celebration of life, I think. And the extraordinary skyline of ceramic, lustered ceramic. I think it's the nicest roof in Europe. And the interior, of course, is a beautiful essay in ceramic art, superbly executed. But to take you back to look at a few other things, there is a number of buildings in Britain, and especially in England rather than Scotland or Wales, where a powerful tradition of terracotta ceramic entered into architecture, and a huge number of public buildings were built with terracotta ceramic, which became a kind of symbolic language. And this is a famous building, Watch Chapel, built 1893 to 1904. I would say it's as close to Art Nouveau that the English got. The English didn't really like Art Nouveau. They were a bit scared of it. They thought it was naughty. And they thought it would corrupt their children. And so England didn't really have Art Nouveau. The Scots, of course, have a wonderful tradition in Art Nouveau, but Scotland is a different country, of course. So different tastes between the English and the Scots, I think, are very interesting. But there is not a lot of Art Nouveau in England. But the pre-Raphaelites and the arts and crafts movement moved towards the edge of Art Nouveau, I would say, if you look around here. Now, this is quite heavily to do also with the Celtic revival, which happened in the UK. But when you look inside the Watch Chapel, it's an incredible combination of pre-Raphaelitism and symbolism, which is moving towards the Art Nouveau spirit, I would say. This is not ceramic for the most part, it's mainly plaster. But I would say this kind of pattern design, quite moving into the Art Nouveau world. Back in France, we tend to forget that one of the great things that Hector Guimard did, He designed the metro stations in Paris, of course. This is his first fully Art Nouveau building, the Castle Barenger, built between 1894 and 1898. But one of the most interesting features of Guimard, I think, is his connection to ceramic. And many of his buildings owe everything to the use of large-scale ceramic. And if you look at this building, you see these little areas here, and actually round the back, you can't see many more, but there's ceramic detailing. I find that quite extraordinary. It's about this big, it's more than a meter, and it's a bat. Now, these ceramics, Guimard worked very closely with a ceramic artist called Alexander Bigot, and Bigot designed for Guimard over a period of time. That's also a bat hung upside down, can you see? And this is a cat. And these are large-scale ceramic production. It raises another issue which I find very interesting, and that is the importance of the Gothic for the Art Nouveau architects. And I would say the Gothic was important right across Europe. I think the Gothic idea is very strong in Barcelona. It's very, very strong in the Scandinavian countries, in Copenhagen and Norway and so forth. But it was very strong in France in the first years of Art Nouveau. And I would say that what this is a modernized idea of the gargoyle. You know, on a Gothic cathedral where you have monsters quite often on the outside of the building, which is meant to frighten away nasty people and to protect the people inside the cathedral. So the gargoyle is a way of threatening evil and attacking evil. I think that Guimard picked up on that idea because when you look at this, it is the stuff of nightmares. It's like an apartment block where every day when you go in, there's an evil-looking bat hanging down looking at you and an evil-looking cat. And the idea would be that they're protecting you. And this very, very organic approach to form. Now, I would say it's another lecture, but it's something I'm very interested in, that Art Nouveau was, across most of Europe, was not really loved into the 20th century. Many modernist architects and modernist designers rejected Art Nouveau and moved away from it. But one movement within the modernist canon actually embraced Art Nouveau, and that was the Surrealists. Salvador Dali was interested in Art Nouveau and thought it was strong. André Breton, the leader of the Surrealists, likewise. But also the sculptors, Jean Arp, the painter Yves Tanguy, as well as Dali, and the British artist Henry Moore. And I think that their very organic approach to things, their organic rounded forms, come from Art Nouveau. They come from this period. Salvador Dali had a large retrospective exhibition in Paris about 25, 30 years ago, and he built a metro station at the entrance. So you had to go through the metro station to get into his exhibition. And he was a fan of Art Nouveau. And I would say this organic approach to nature is very, very important for 20th century avant-garde surrealist practice, for sculpture, and for a range of painting. And it's very rarely been credited as such. This is also Alexander Bigot, and we're in the entranceway here of the Castle Barenger. This is a Guimard pot, and as you can see, again, very, very organic, but I would say also still quite strangely threatening. I was showing this pot to a friend who said, is ceramic meant to frighten you, like watching a horror film? Are you actually meant to think you're watching a horror film when you look at this? And it does look actually rather scary. If you look at the design of the metro stations, if you look closely, there are many frightening faces looking out at you. So the Gothic and the dark side of human psychology was embraced by Art Nouveau. This is a wonderful Guimard pot. It's about 1.5 meters high. And my favorite building by Hector Guimard is not in Paris. It's in Lille. And it's the only Art Nouveau building in Lille. And it's now an optician's, and I don't think it's very loved. But I think it is one of the most beautiful little Art Nouveau buildings. And as you can see, it's very, very Gothic in its feel. But what makes it interesting for this lecture, it was originally a ceramic company who were selling mainly tile at the time, and they commissioned Guimard to build this building in Lille. And they developed a new material, which they called lava, as in volcanic lava. And it's a new kind of stoneware ceramic, which they thought could be widely used in architecture. Sadly, it wasn't widely used in architecture, and the company went out of business. But I'm sure you agree, that's rather beautiful. And this is Guimard really operating like a sculptor. One of the greatest Art Nouveau buildings in France is in Nancy, and is the home of Louis Majorel, the furniture designer, the Art Nouveau furniture designer, and it was built by Henri Sauvage, the Parisian architect. And it's been superbly restored, and there's a huge amount of ceramic through the whole building. This is a balustrade, again, by Alexander Bigot. And I think this is an incredible piece of art to be made in 1900. It's quite extraordinary, don't you think? I might add, the technology at that stage, very impressive. Firing things on that scale, not easy. Yes, I did get carried away with making films, so you'll have to put up with them. But this is inside Majorel's house. Can you make that video work, please? Oh, sorry. Yeah, there you go. Again, this is Alexander Bigot. So what we've got here is an idea of Gesamtkunstwerk, a fusion of furniture, of wood, ceramic, mosaic, and metal. The theme of the house very much around that. But Guimard exploiting ceramic art to create extraordinary architectural features. And that one too, I did try and put nice music to these slides, but I couldn't work out how to do it. And, so I apologize, but there should be this romantic, lovely music playing. So there you have it, a combination of fresco painting, stone, metal, ceramic, glass. Now, in this book, I think the book will get me into quite a lot of trouble with contemporary architects, because I try and raise the issue of the terrible architecture which often is built in our cities. I think Barcelona is far better than the UK, where the quality of architecture, and there have been major scandals in the last years of buildings falling down. I think architecture has become a political issue in our own times. And when we look back to this brief golden age, where the quality of skill and the quality of material and the idea that architecture is a public art, that when you look at a beautiful building, you're meant to be moved, it's meant to make you feel better, unless it frightens you to death, like the Gothic bats. But nevertheless, the idea of the quality of the environment. The Art Nouveau architects often talked about the idea that when you walk around a forest, it makes you feel good. You're raised by nature. And they wanted to bring nature into the city, to use natural imagery and quality material to create an environment that people could enjoy living in. I think that we are now at a point where we need to embrace those ideas again. I think we need to actually reskill and to think about what kind of architecture our cities should have. I think it's become an issue. this little building is very, very interesting, and I think it relates a little bit to this building that Luis was telling me about, that this building was a house, but with a factory attached. And I was in Beauvais, which is about an hour and a half north of Paris. It's between Calais and Paris. So Beauvais, a beautiful little medieval Renaissance city. But it had a potter, a family of potters called the Grebers. And the Grebers built a factory. And then in 1911, they built what was a house on the end connected to the factory. And they they're a ceramic company. The Grebers are ceramics, and they produced a lot of vessels in the Art Nouveau style. But they did architectural ceramic also. And they covered this house, this building, with wonderful, wonderful, wonderful ceramic, including this. If you think of Germany, or places like Cologne, where you get patterned roofs on Cologne Cathedral and elsewhere. But look at this. It's a peculiar, beautiful mixture of the secessionists. It looks quite like Charles Rennie Mackintosh in its patterning, but also of more mainstream Art Nouveau. This bottom piece down here are beautiful Chinese-style glazes on the building. And now, I think they were very clever, because you had to go straight past their building if you were going between Calais and Paris. In other words, if you were traveling from England to Paris, you had to go past this building. And I think it was like advertising. I think that they sold a lot of ceramic based on this building. These wonderful little salamanders. It's all ceramic. The salamander is a symbol of Beauvais. The cathedral is covered in them, and the city square is covered in them. So it raises another interesting issue, that the style is really quite international. These people were looking all over Europe, and they were influenced by that. But they also were very interested in their own city and the symbolism of their own city and what their own city represented. Yes, this is the roof line where you've got all these frogs hanging. It makes you wonder how on earth a frog would get up there, and they're all hanging on. But you can see that, in effect, they're very complicated tiles. These are mold produced, and this is mold produced. You can see that's a unit. So you could go to this factory and order ornamental decoration to put on your building. I so wish they were still doing that, and it will be wonderful. And you can see the quality on the ground there of the glazes. If there is one city, again, we were chatting earlier about this, Luis and I. If there's one city that's more dramatic in its use of ceramic in architecture than Barcelona, it would be Budapest. And it's very different. The spirit is very different. But the Zolnay factory, the great ceramic company which still exists, was producing a huge amount of ceramic. And Odon Lechner, the greatest of the Hungarian architects, made use of Zolnay ceramic in virtually all of his buildings. This was originally the Royal Post Office, and it's now the Treasury. Very sadly, this building at the minute on the ground floor is completely covered in scaffolding, and they're trying to restore it. But I think they ran out of money, so it was the Applied Art School, and you can't really see anything on the ground. But I was there with my photographer friend, and he had a drone, and we put the drone into the air so that you could see. And likewise, this building here. We weren't sure it was legal to use a drone in Budapest, so I would have to keep watch on the corner to make sure there were no police coming while we did that. And we're afraid that when the book comes out, we'll get arrested. But I said to him, look, you're the photographer, you're the one who goes to prison. Anyway, you can see Zolnay tile. Now, what is very, very interesting is that Budapest, part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, very, very close to Vienna and to the Viennese secession in many ways. But in actual fact, the single biggest influence on the Budapest and Hungarian Art Nouveau architects is Barcelona. And you constantly see references to Barcelona's style. And I think this has got something to do, this sculptural effect, with what they saw. They were looking all over Europe, and I think it's Barcelona that they found most attractive. And you can see here that apart from sculpture, there's mainstream roof tiling as well. This is now the Geological Institute in Budapest. It is an extraordinary place. The buildings are superbly coloured. And it's not just Odon Lechner. I'm just showing you Odon Lechner tonight, but there is a whole group of architects using tile in a really wonderful way. And this is the building I just showed you, the Geological Institute, and you get these strange sculptural effects. So Budapest, a wonderful, wonderful city. So we were told that there was an incredible ceramic tomb in the Jewish cemetery in Budapest. So we said, as you do, oh, let's go to the Jewish cemetery in Budapest. It was about an hour's taxi ride, and we got there and we found out that the cemetery was square kilometers, many kilometers. So we went looking for this beautiful tomb. After 4 hours, we gave up and walked back, and then we saw the tomb next door to the main entrance. We'd walk straight past it. This is Odon Lechner here, and you can see what an extraordinary building. It raises very, very interesting issues. I'm sure you would agree that to do with what a tomb is for. Usually, you feel rather sad and so forth, and often very religious. This is the Jewish cemetery, remember? So the symbolism is not Christian; it's Judaic, but this is about the joy of life. We looked at the building and we thought, we would love to live inside this little tomb. And it's the idea of continuum and the joy of life and the celebration of life. And one of the features of it is on the sides of the tomb, there are these little glass lights, so that when you look inside the tomb, can you see in the top corner there? So the light comes in and lights this extraordinary, beautiful, beautiful interior, which is a mixture of mosaic and ceramic. It's worth going to Hungary just to see that. It's a miraculous little thing. Antwerp, one of my favorite cities. Antwerp, I always think, is Belgium's Liverpool. The people are so lovely and so forth, and you're always a little bit frightened. And as with Liverpool, it's very hard to tell what anyone's saying at any time, because the local dialect is so strong that even British people don't know what the Liverpudlians are talking about. But it was the major port of empire, of the Belgian Empire, and it expanded dramatically at the end of the 19th century. And Antwerp, it doesn't have as much as Brussels, but I would say we have overlooked Antwerp. It's a wonderful Art Nouveau city, and there are several districts. And one of the major features is the powerful use of tile. Virtually every building has tile here and there. In fact, to be honest, Budapest and Antwerp could have been the whole lecture in some ways. Quite extraordinary, I'm sure you agree. And now I'm just looking around a few other places. Zagreb. What I found interesting in Zagreb is the influence of Vienna, quite strong, but also the influence of Glasgow. These square tiles, this patterning, quite Charles Rennie Mackintosh, I would say. And likewise, this detailing here. And then these beautiful natural abstract patterns. But this kind of Art Nouveau geometry really did have a Glaswegian as well as a Viennese feel to it. And it was made about the same time, so we assume these architects were all talking to each other. Zagreb has a whole group of beautiful, superb Art Nouveau buildings, which again make heavy use of tile in their decoration. You can see a close-up there. I was told that the man who built this building owned a tile factory. And so that's why the building is covered in tiles. And I need to follow that up and find out more about him. But you can see this beautiful patterning on the top there. Now that's not ceramic, that's concrete. And what we noticed in a number of cities, and it's very much a feature of Riga, is that there's a crossover between work in cast concrete and ceramic. The two are often used together in the same way. So you can see this tile work here, and then the concrete. This is Ljubljana, and again, absolutely wonderful. I mean, absolutely wonderful detailing, and again, quite a lot of it based on geometric patterning that you would think of Vienna and you would think of Glasgow. But it's different in Ljubljana. It has its own character. A few weeks ago, I went to Portugal to Aveiro, which has a whole group of very, very interesting Art Nouveau buildings. And what we discovered in Aveiro, first of all, they were a major tile producer from the later 19th century, right up to relatively recently, and exporting tile all over Europe. So as with the Spanish, the Portuguese architectural ceramic tile, a major, major industry. And most of the Art Nouveau buildings I saw had tile work decorating them. It's a lovely little building. And what is now their Art Nouveau Museum, this is the Aveiro Art Nouveau Museum, is mainly stonework, but as you can see, this is tile. And then as soon as you go inside, the whole building has superb mainly representational tile. And I would say this is very, very unusual. It doesn't really look like anywhere else except Aveiro. So the artists and architects develop their own approach to things, especially that. It's rather wonderful. Which brings us, before we close, I have to say, I show this slide partly because I'm hugely proud of this image, because we read that that Gaudi was very, very interested in the arts and crafts movement, and in William Morris, and in the Garden City movement in England. And so he spelt park with a K, which is the English spelling. That's the best the English did in Art Nouveau. That's it, you know, K, that's it. There's nothing else, really, to be honest. You have to go to Scotland. I might add, it's an interesting footnote that in Wales, Cardiff, the capital city of Wales, was growing dramatically at the end of the 19th century. It was one of the fastest growing cities in the world because they had coal, they had metals, but they also had the deepest ports, so they could take major ships. And the architecture of that period is very, very interesting. And everything about it would suggest that it was very like cities like Barcelona, like Budapest, like Ljubljana, that is, cities which were industrializing and urbanizing very quickly at the end of the century. Often you get Art Nouveau when you get that. Chicago is another interesting example, that when a city at the end of the 19th century is growing very fast, and there's major industry there, and there's money there, you get Art Nouveau. It's not always the case, but it's often the case. But in Cardiff, it's not the case. They didn't embrace Art Nouveau. They did a further revival of the Gothic revival. And in the center of the city, there are these very strange, beautiful Gothic revival buildings, which are very different from the previous Gothic buildings. But I think Cardiff is part of this bigger story. And it remains an interesting question why they didn't embrace Art Nouveau, because many of the other ingredients were there to do that. Anyway, coming back, Gwell Park. I'm always amazed, from the very first time I came to Gwell Park to now, and I'm still amazed, at this extraordinary idea of taking ceramic and breaking it into shards, and then using that as the pattern work. I think it's unique. Many of you may know it, but I haven't seen it anywhere else on this scale. This fascinating use of ceramic. Symbolically, I think it's very, very interesting that if any of you have any valuable pots at home, you will know that if you break the pot, it's not worth anything, even if you fix it. But when ceramic breaks, it loses its value. So there's something very, very interesting about you deliberately using broken ceramic and then making a masterpiece in architecture. It's like deliberately removing its value and then making architecture with it which belongs to everybody. So it's about removing the economic value from the art and making it into a public value. If that makes sense, does that make sense? It's quite symbolic that you would use broken ceramic, I think, on this scale. Quite amazing. And what can one say? I was saying earlier on that in Spain, as a whole, more than any other country, sometimes an artist or an architect seems to step out of their time, that they do things that don't really belong in their time. It's like, this should be now. It shouldn't be 100 years ago. Even now, it looks crazy and wonderful. You think of Goya. You know, he's an adventurous artist now, stepping out of time. And Gaudi, more than any other architect that I can think of in the history of architecture, has got this amazing ability to step out of his time. He uses the past, he uses history, but he comes up with solutions which are unimaginable. And I think this incredible use of ceramic art is just incredible. But you know that because you all live here. You live. And clearly one could have done 10 lectures on ceramic in Barcelona, but I thought you might enjoy seeing things from a wider range in Europe. I think this one moves as well, actually. Yep. I've come to realize that Barcelona has a problem which is actually now visiting London, of too many tourists, of perhaps too many people coming. I had to politely stand for hours. To ask people to move while I took this photograph. They were very annoyed, but very, very, very crowded. And it's the beauty of Barcelona is perhaps its major problem. And it's a beautiful problem to have. It's much better being a beautiful city than an ugly city that nobody visits. But the tourist problem is an interesting one. I'm sure you'll agree that it's reaching a point where it must be, you know, the sheer numbers of people coming must be a problem. So, in the Art Nouveau period, pot, figurine, and tile were often combined to create new types of object. Quite often, this grand tradition of the vessel, the figure, and architectural ceramic were brought together and fused in very interesting ways. And it's partly to do with this idea I was suggesting of Gesamtkunstwerk, a total work of art, where you use all the skills which are in your city to create what is really a physical opera. Gesamtkunstwerk is a word brought out by Wagner, Richard Wagner, the opera genius. But the Art Nouveau architects used the word to apply to what they were doing. Gesamtkunstwerk, a total work of art where all the skills come together. And, oh yes, I'll come to this in a minute. And I think that became a major factor in how ceramic was used all over Europe, but especially here, and to an extent in Brussels and in Budapest, to an extent in Helsinki. I show this because this is Bernard Palissy, who's one of the greatest ceramic artists of all time, and he was working in the French Renaissance. there was a huge revival of his work. He made these amazing vessels, these platters, with creatures crawling all over them. The thing which is very interesting is that these are cast from real creatures. He took a real fish and a real snake and cast it and then stuck it on the plate. So they're real creatures. There was a revival of interest in him at the end of the 19th century, and it became a very popular idiom. And this isn't strictly speaking Art Nouveau, but it became influential on the Art Nouveau architects. And the two countries doing it most were France and the Portuguese. The Portuguese, and this is a French pot and this is a Portuguese pot. And that's also Portuguese, and I find this very beautiful. I enjoy this one especially because it's in the museum in Cambridge, and until about 2 years ago, it was thought to be by Palissy and was thought to be about 1550, 1560, and we now know that it wasn't. It was made about 1880, but I'm sure you agree that's a superb little thing. So this was all over Europe, this combining creatures with ceramic vessels. Another thing which began and developed, and one of the most important artists for Art Nouveau, I think, symbolist artist, is Paul Gauguin. And it's not widely known, but Gauguin, we have about 75 works in ceramic by Gauguin. I was very keen to borrow them all and do a big ceramic show. That would be such a nice show, don't you think? And that, I think that's a movie there, because this painting done at the time, where do we come from? What are we and where are we going? I think the imagery in works like this is in the Boston Museum, by the way, paintings like this influenced his ceramic. And I think that Gauguin's ceramic, I think things like this is a self-portrait mug. There are two versions of it. There's one in Copenhagen and there's one in Paris. And this, I think, is just an incredible vessel to be made in the late 1880s. And I think Gauguin was very influential on the Art Nouveau ceramic artists. This is Jean Carré. I showed you some of his pots earlier on, but he also made creatures like this. It could be a subtext that quite a lot of the ceramic artists in Art Nouveau had deep psychological problems. That could be a theme of the lecture, but we won't go there. But this is clearly a nightmare figure by Jean Carré. I think this is the nicest fireplace in the history of art. It's by the Müller brothers. It's in the Metropolitan Museum. So ceramic breaks out completely into the architectural environment, and the idea of the tile, the figure, and the pot somehow all come together. Clement Massier is one of the great French ceramic artists, and he made a whole range of creatures like this. This is about this big. It's about 1/3 of a meter. And you do get an extraordinary range of sculptural ceramic in this period. Now, I think artists like this, if we think of Puig, and if we think of Guimard and the Castle Baranger with the Gothic and gargoyle and frightening imagery, a lot of the studio ceramic artists, a lot of the artists making pots and figures, were also working in this way. These incredible pots are made by the Martin brothers, who were a very, very eccentric group of brothers working in London. Their work mainly sold in Europe, and these are tobacco jars. The birds' heads come off, and you can fill them up. And this is a little jug for pouring beer, and this one is for tobacco. The head comes off. I might add also that these pots were all made in 1898, 1899. Bram Stoker's novel, Dracula, was published in 1898. The whole of Europe became obsessed with the occult and with the dark side of life. And it was also tied into a powerful moment when alternative religions started to come to the fore and organized religion started to slide backwards. So there are a wide range of psychological, symbolist imagery around, because it connected to people thinking about the human state of mind and the dark side of life. And of course, it's the first age of psychoanalysis in the sciences. So I think all of these things influence the architecture and design. So ceramic has three main types to conclude: the pot, the vessel; the figure, which is about human presence; and the tile, which is architecture. And just to finish on, that lovely man there is the photographer for my book, and he didn't want to leave the building. As you know, he just wanted to stay all day, taking more and more pictures of it. And it remains one of the greatest interiors. Dominic's Palace of Music. Now, what we're looking at there is mosaic, furniture, sculpture, ceramic, integrated and brought together. And especially when you look at, the thing is held together, in my view, by the ceramic arts. The ceramic arts keep everything and hold it in place. And that stained glass is just miraculous. It makes us all think about the skills which were available at that time, that architects could make right across all of the arts, that the architects could make use of incredibly skilled people. It will be interesting to analyze what happened to that skill base. Clearly, we still have very skilled people in our society. There are many wonderful skilled ceramic artists and designers in tile and so forth. There are still skilled people around, but they were so present at the end of the 19th century. It's very powerfully evident, for example, in Brussels, where you can see virtuoso, incredible quality of craftsmanship in wood, metal, stained glass, ceramic, and so forth. And clearly, we don't have access to that as much as we did. And it raises interesting issues about how we build our architecture, I think. And this is the great building. And we can all agree, for a cathedral-sized building, it's being built quite quickly, 100 years, pretty quick. But I'm sure you all agree that the brilliant use of ceramic, this here, I find it quite difficult to work out what this is composed of. I'm pretty sure the birds, and perhaps some of you could advise me, I'm pretty sure the birds are ceramic. This is sculpted in concrete, and I couldn't tell whether the greenery is ceramic pressed into the concrete. It's quite difficult to tell when you're looking out at it, but I didn't get time to look that up. And a most extraordinary use of ceramic in architecture, the most dramatic. I can't think of anything more spectacular than this. So, thank you. That's all I have to say.